James started with us as our assistant minister, and one or two folks said to me at that point, you know, it's quite a wee while since we've had a student in training for ministry working here in Easterhouse, either in Lockwood or in St George's and St Peter's, the two former congregations, and certainly not in the congregations when they've been united. So it'd be good to hear a wee bit about what an assistant minister's supposed to be and to do and all of that. So that's why we're going to do a wee interview just now, and then we'll come to the second slot. I'll explain in a wee while. But I wanted to read you a wee portion from the Bible. You know how keen I am on the Bible. I keep coming back to it with you. And this few verses from chapter 10 of Romans, verses 13 to 15, are a good backdrop, an important backdrop to what James is about and also what I'm about as your minister. So let's hear these words. Everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. How then can they call on the one they have not believed in? And how can they believe in the one of whom they have not heard? And how can they hear without someone preaching to them? And how can anyone preach unless they're sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news. You'll recognise that last phrase because we sing it in that song, Our God Reigns. It actually comes from the book of Isaiah in the Old Testament. I don't know whether your feet are beautiful or my feet are beautiful, James, but that's basically what the passage is saying, that the feet of those who preach the good news are beautiful. What it means, of course, is that the message that they bring is something which is beautiful, hopefully. So, James, we're just going to go through a few questions together. Yeah. We haven't rehearsed this, so this is going to be as it is. Now, 2 weeks ago, when you joined us on the 1st of August, you started by telling the congregation, before you did the reading that morning, a wee bit about your background, where you were born, how you were brought up. Now go on to tell us a wee bit about your early involvement in the church and how you came to faith. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so I, as I said, was born in Tollcross, and our local church was St Margaret's, Tollcross Park Church. And I was involved in the church from probably about 2 weeks old. So as I've been born and raised in the church. And then around the ages of 8 or 9, I kind of realised that our kind of family, we were raised to go to the church, but there has to be a kind of personal element to that. It's just not enough to see, you know, my parents go to church, so I go to church. So it was about 8 or 9 that I asked Jesus to be my saviour. And then for the next, my kind of personal journey is almost in kind of 2 halves in a sense. The first half was when I was 8 or 9, and then as time progressed, I kind of grew in faith, but to be honest, it kind of stalled. So as after a few years, I didn't really progress or develop in that sense. So after Tollcross, I went to Ullapool. That was in 1999. We went up to Ullapool. And then it wasn't until I was back in Glasgow. So after Ullapool, I went to Aberdeen to study. And in Aberdeen, I was doing, and this is, looking back, I'm like, I don't understand why I didn't see this, but I was doing history, because I wanted to be a history teacher at that point. And I was doing theology in these 2 courses. I was going to church fairly regularly. I was going to Gilcomston South in Aberdeen. I was hearing all this good stuff, reading this good stuff, but it never really made an impact on my life. So as I could say, you know, if you asked me a question, I could spout what I believed was right, but it never actually made an impact on my actions or really my decisions. And it wasn't until I came back to Glasgow after graduating in 2010, 2011, I became friends with who is now my best friend, and he almost kind of discipled me along And it was at that point that I was like, wait a minute, because I'm a Christian, it should impact my actions as well. It's all right believing the right stuff, but without actually impacting on your actions and how you respond to things, that is, that's important, and that's what I kind of, at that point, believe. So it's almost a kind of a reformation or a renaissance of my faith at that point. So as a believer, I was a Christian, but it didn't really have an impact on my actions and outlook in life. And that's kind of at sort of 2010, 2011, I kind of recognised that.
So about 10 years ago, things kind of changed
Yes.
a bit for you then.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting because my guess is that, and I've encountered people who kind of think this way, they think that people who are training to be a minister or are a minister were like formed in the womb as a minister, you know, and that was, you know, just kind of perfect. I remember people saying to me, you're the last person in our class at school that I expected to become a church minister. And so it's really good to hear you kind of describing that honest appraisal of your journey, if you like, your journey into a faith which has been deeper.
Yep.
So that's great. So people get to a deeper faith, and you know we all want to be able to make that journey. But then what makes the difference in terms of coming to train for ministry? Tell us a bit about your call and a bit about preparation for ministry as well. Yeah,
so my dad, I'm sure most of you will know, is a minister as well. So I did not want to be a minister, and I made that quite clear. Everyone was, oh, do you want to follow in your dad's footsteps? No, I do not want to follow my dad's footsteps. And that really was what I believed until the first kind of inklings was at university at Aberdeen. As I said, I was studying history as well as theology, and I always enjoyed theology, so I enjoyed church history and that sort of thing. So at that point I was like, well, you know, should I change to theology? But I've always, at those sort of early stages, always thought it was someone else's expectation of me that I would, it's just people expect that to happen. It wasn't a call from God. And that really was kind of my call, in a sense that I kept running away from God. That's why kind of Jonah comes to mind. And my call was that I kept on running away from God, and essentially God had to keep closing doors until there was almost nowhere for me to escape, but actually take up my call. And so that was at university, and then when I graduated from university, as I said, 2010, I came back to live in Bishopbriggs with my parents because of the crash and Aberdeen's so expensive. And then I read a few books about it, and then I went, well, there's an expectation if you're a Christian that you somehow have to go into paid church work. And I read a book by John Piper called Don't Waste Your Life, and what he said is that that's not the case, that you know people can be teachers, work in construction and still be Christians and are still called to that job. And that again almost kind of set me back. I'm like, well, no, that's, again, it's just, we have a notion that being a Christian, you have to go into paid ministry. That's the only way that a Christian can be a Christian, in a sense. But that book, I came to realise that, well, no, it's, you know, I worked in insurance at the time. You can be a claims handler as well as a Christian. And it wasn't until, that was in sort of 2011. In 2014, it's still the niggle that God was calling me to ministry. It just wouldn't go away. So as in I spoke to my dad, I spoke to other Christians, and then he says, well, sometimes you actually have to sort of pushing on doors. So I started the application process in 2014. I got so far 2015, got rejected at that point. So as I got rejected just at the last hurdle, essentially, the National Assessment Conference. And then it was a kind of year of reassessing things. So I was having conversations with more experienced Christians, with ministers, and just saying, well, what is that? And essentially the reason I didn't get through was I didn't articulate my sense of call. So that year was kind of working out what God wanted me to do. And then eventually I reapplied and got through. So yeah, I think that it's really been just running away from God for most of my time. And it was interesting, my boss at Aviva, I was in the process of applying, and I was doing well in Aviva, kind of going up the ranks. And in my kind of one-to-one at the end of the year, she's like, James, you don't really want to be in here, do you? This is not what you feel that your kind of vocation or call in life. I'm like, actually, no, it's not. Now, she didn't know that I was applying for ministry or anything like that, and that kind of confirmed to me that people obviously see that this is the job that I was doing wasn't really what I wanted to do in life, even though it was going well. So it just never fulfilled me. And that's, looking back, I'm like, well, if I had done another job, I don't think I would ever be as fulfilled. I think there'd be a void. I would think that that wasn't what God had called me to do.
I think there's some really important things in there. I don't know, how much you're catching this, but for me, what James has expressed there about that sense of running away from a call is very often what you see in the Bible. If you think about the story of Moses, for example, Moses says, I can't speak, send my brother. He's a better speaker than me. There's Isaiah, who doesn't think he's holy enough, and Jeremiah, who's too young, and all sorts of examples in the Bible of that, and I can identify with that as well. So again, sometimes people think that folk that are in ministry are folk that run towards it because they want to be on a platform, they want people to listen to them and all of that. And actually, that's often the furthest thing from the truth. James and I have already spoken about this, about the kind of nature that he has that wouldn't necessarily push him to the front. But there's that sense of God keeps coming back again, is what you were saying. Yeah. So you got through second time at a national assessment conference. What happened next?
Yep, then I started my academic training, so I trained at Glasgow for 3 years and split my time between academic work and placements. So my first placement was at St Mary's in Kirkintilloch, which I enjoyed. It was different and challenging at different times, but from every placement I have been to, I've taken so much from there. So my first placement was at St Mary's, and then you have a summer placement, which is 10 weeks full time, and I done that at the Royal in the hospital chaplaincy team. And again, I really enjoyed that. It was challenging, as Derek says, going up to someone and just speaking to them, not knowing who they are or what they're doing. It's a bit embarrassing, and I was a bit shy, but it took me out of my comfort zone, and I really enjoyed getting alongside patients and kind of journeying with them through that time. So that was my summer placement, and then my last placement, my second placement, was at Burnside Blair Beth in Rutherglen. Sadly, I really enjoyed that as well, but sadly that was kind of cut short because of lockdown in March last year. So I felt that I just kind of got into the congregation and was kind of getting settled in, and then lockdown happened. And they put a wee bit online, but it's obviously not the same as being in person. So as in my last year, I split my time between academic work and also done a locum job at Mary Lee on the south side as well. And that's where we are today.
Okay. So again, there's two parts to that. There's the study, the full-time study, and that's always been very important in terms of Church of Scotland ministry, that we train our ministers to the highest level academically, theologically that we can. That's really important. Not so that we can use big words to impress people, but so that we understand some of the stuff that lies behind sometimes some of the questions that people ask. And that doesn't mean to say that we have answers for everything, because we certainly don't. So there's the academic side, the study side, and there's the practical side. And that brings us to Easterhouse, and so here you are. Some people call this a probationary placement, and they refer to the student as being a probationer. I always think that makes it sound as if they've just come out of jail. So we agreed, James and I, that assistant minister, which they're allowed to be called, is a much better designation. And it starts to mean that you will hopefully treat James as one of our ministers here, and also that he will recognise that he himself is being formed as a minister, and that's really, really important as part of it. But why did you want to come to Easterhouse? It clearly wasn't to work with me, that's for sure.
No, I came to Easterhouse because I felt that it's quite different from the churches I've been in. So as the churches are quite formal, whereas this is quite laid back and kind of what I'm used to. The reason I picked Easterhouse was that I wanted to learn a different area of Glasgow. So as I wanted to learn from you guys as a congregation and the community, and also Easterhouse has got a lot of community activities and things like that. It's the centre of the community, whereas the churches I've been to in the past, although do community events, it's a bit different to that. So I felt that was a kind of a training need, and so to speak, and that's what the training team identified as well, that it would allow me to explore further, but also the congregation, we can learn from each other, and I learn from you and you learn from me. So I was excited to come here, and I was glad it was my first choice. I had to come up with a list of 2 or 3, but I wanted to come to Easterhouse. We and Derek met in September. Me and Lorna met with Derek, and I was like, I want to come here. So as in the training team, we're like, well, you actually have to pick others as well, just in case you don't get Easterhouse. So I reluctantly picked other churches, but I wanted to come here because I felt this is where God was calling me to learn from the church in Easterhouse and from you as well.
And I think that that's really important to us, isn't it? Because we're about working together. And I want to reference one of the things that James said early on in this interview, that as believers, we're all called to be ministers. Whether you have a ministry in industry and being an electrician, or being in a lab in a hospital, or going door to door as a salesperson, or you're in a school, or you're in admin, or whatever it might be. And I'm kind of looking around and I'm picking just 1 or 2 different things here. We all have a presence, we all have a ministry in that sense, and the ministry of the Word and Sacrament, which is what I do and what James is training for in this last part, is one particular ministry amongst many. And I'm going to say more about that in our second section today, which is very important that leads on from that. So thanks so much for sharing with us. Thanks for sticking with it. Because it can be very easy to be put off. Maybe to go to National Assessment Conference and be turned away and think, well, maybe it wasn't the right thing. But James has persevered. He's persevered through his studies, persevered through different placements, and we're delighted to have you as a family. And I think there are only 2 assistant ministers, only 2 probationary ministers in the whole of Glasgow Presbytery at the moment, and one of them's here. So that shows you how few people are training in the Church of Scotland for full-time ministry at the moment. That's a concern. We've shared this concern together. We pray about that for more people to come forward. But it's also an opportunity for us all to step forward and play our part. So thank you for that. We promise, don't we, that we will continue to pray for James and for Lorna and for baby James as they continue their journey towards ministry and wherever God is calling them beyond their time in Easterhouse. But we pray God's blessing upon you during your time here. Thanks so much.
No, thank you.
You round of applause.